All right, so yeah, I'm a designer. I actually work in the advertising industry, so I'm more focused on communication design, but I do all sorts of different things. This is a new project, and I am working with two other people, a mathematician who's also a composer and who actually just left for Stanford to do her PhD in composition, and then a philosopher who studied at Oxford, and he now teaches at Hunter College here in the city. As we all know, philosophy is sort of bound up in books and essays, and its primary expression is the written word. And so we kind of think of philosophy as being this sort of like very dry, dense subject, rarely illustrated, if at all. The sort of materiality of philosophy is critical thought and critical thinking. And I want to make a really important point about that for a room of designers, which is that designing is thinking. And that might sound obvious to a room full of designers, but what I'm really trying to say here is that the process through which we work through design problems is a parallel process to the same way that we formulate and thoughts and ideas and then articulate them into written or spoken words. So this should be encouraging for anyone in the room who's ever been doubtful about working on a design solution for something that's like representing a really complex problem, of which philosophy is filled with many. And the one from the project I want to talk to you about is it's an old ancient Buddhist parable called The Blind Man and the Elephant. It's thousands of years old, and it has like several variations, but it goes something like this. There are four blind men, and they all approach an elephant, and they touch a different body part of the elephant. So one takes the big floppy ear, one takes the long trunk, the tusk, the tail, and then when they go to describe it to each other, unsurprisingly, they can't seem to agree on exactly what an elephant is. And so, as you can tell, this is a thought experiment about perception and whether or not multiple people can all know the same thing. So it itself is a communication problem. And so one of the things that really attracted me to this particular story was the fact that it was so old, and there are hundreds and hundreds of paintings, drawings, illustrations that already exist of this. So it kind of begs the question, like, why does a designer need to even take a stab at this? But it occurred to me that all of the different representations of this over time were simply displaying the scenario or the story of what was sort of playing out with the figures, and it was always taking place from a sort of third-party, omniscient point of view. And what that lacks is the actual core of the idea that it's trying to tell you. That's the point of a parable, right? And so what it is not giving you is that core idea about perception and gaining and gleaning knowledge. And so that's sort of where I set out as a designer, and I started thinking about how could I do that. And so what I had to do is I had to work backwards and try to think about what was the experience of reading that story for the first time and arriving at that little point of illumination, that little like cognitive spark when you're like, oh, okay, I get what they're trying to say. And so that's what I really wanted to represent. Not necessarily a narrative, like a linear narrative scenario, but actually try to get at that core idea. And so that, I think, is a really important point here for me, because I think this is like one of the distinctive characteristics from where design starts to diverge from illustration. It has a sort of visual heuristic element to it. Speaking of representation, knocking some. So for me, one of the solutions was to actually eliminate the four blind men altogether, because from a narrative point of view, it puts the user or the audience or the viewer into the point of view of the blind men, which is a paradox, of course, point of view. But the idea was then to kind of think about the four different points of view of the four different blind men, and then use a very simple visual gesture to try to suggest the negation of the points of view. So all of a sudden you are the blind man, but you can simultaneously still understand the different points of view. So this is just like a very simple example from the project. We have a lot of different ones that we're working on. And so to sort of like keep in the lightning speed mode, to answer my own question here, I do think yes, philosophy can be visualized, but I think that it's important to keep in mind that design is the most powerful and transformative when it is a visual heuristic, when it's actually doing some of the heavy lifting along with and a little bit for your viewer. So trying to think about that and not just trying to make a representation, you're actually trying to achieve that cognitive spark with your design. So shameless plug here, we're trying to publish a book, and if you are interested in the ideas, you can go to our bit.ly link, which is bit.ly/philosophy designed. So thank you guys so much.
Is there any questions for Christian? We'll take questions from you.
It is.
What was the
So
question?
I
Is the
studied
Kickstarter
philosophy back in college. It was becoming a big part of what I took in my major. I want to ask, what do you think is the hardest concept to actually visualize in terms of philosophy? Are we talking about death? Are we talking about faith, love?
Oh boy.
Which ones are we actually thinking are the hardest parts to actually visualize to the general masses?
Yeah, well, death would be the hardest, I presume. I think that what we're trying to focus on is more like particular theories or like more identifiable philosophical strains. And so maybe something like death or life might be a little bit too broad. But to still answer your question, the mathematician has really put me up against a wall because I was really bad in math class. And so like trying to work through those ideas take me about twice as long as the ones that David gives me, because those are more like literarily digestible. And so yeah, the math ones are really hard. And also there's one that I worked on which is called Zeno's paradox, which is like an alternative understanding of time, which is really sort of like wonky. But that one was like really difficult. But I think that I kind of nailed it, and you can see that on my Kickstarter page. And so yeah, so those have been like some of the harder ones.
A follow-up question, how would you make philosophy relevant to the general masses?
Yeah, I think this is part of it, because I think what I do and don't want to do, I want to make something that is not necessarily sort of like pop philosophy, where it like is like a total reduction or an oversimplification of it, but I do want to create a book or a platform where people can access these ideas and use them as visual heuristics to get onto something like a more in-depth analysis and a more comprehension of these ideas. So it's sort of like the bridge between pop philosophy and like really like reading the whole book, something like that.
Great.
One more.
Yeah.
No, I got music off.
Okay.
Yeah, if we want to continue the conversation, you'll be able to speak with Christian. For right now, feel free to go get yourself a pizza or a snack.
We have no refill. Oh no, we have beer. Like you can